Hollywoodization of the workplace. The star gets a huge amount of money, a huge prize, a huge compensation. The extras were getting very little. Now they're not even there anymore. I thought, a bit naively, I said, okay, let's double the headcount, give everybody AI, the whole thing will be 10 times more productive, we're ready to conquer the world. And what I discovered is, Tony Robbins, which is to say, is everything in business is 80% psychology, 20% skill. But when I look at it today with the AI, it suddenly becomes 99% psychology, 1% skill.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey Ori,
Hi.
excited to have you on the show.
Excited to be here.
You have been thinking a lot about job replacement, especially from an employer perspective. I think that's such an important view because I think as consumers, we're using ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever it is. And obviously there's a lot of conversation about what government should do, but I think the employer perspective is really interesting. So before we jump into the topic, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Ori Sasson. I have a company in Singapore, which is a software development or product development company. And what we deal with is primarily systems for government, for intelligence investigation. I have a couple of other companies, which is co-founded with my wife, which are special needs private school and a therapy center, which kind of gives me maybe a wider vantage points on different roles and how this thing unfolds.
This is such a hot topic right now, which is obviously productivity, but also touches about education and also touches upon on policy as well. So lots to uncover. But I think when we first connected, we started talking about jobs, right? And what's going to happen to them. So Ori, from your perspective, what's happening to jobs and AI?
Right. So I think it depends on the kind of job, right? So you have jobs which are totally unaffected. If somebody is a truck driver, even those people say the AI is going to come for that, we don't see that really happening. But also jobs like nurses, teachers in school, let's say therapists, and many, many other professions which are more hands-on in a way, and they cannot be replaced as easily. They could be supported, augmented. You can have some edge cases. Let's say if you need a plumber, you can say, look, I'll take a photo and ask ChatGPT. Maybe you'll get the answer. Maybe you'll get a flooding. But so some jobs will be a bit affected. But basically, I feel like the blue-collar jobs obviously are a bit more resistant to this. So what I feel is the main thing that is happening is that the adoption rate is different for different companies. So if you look at startups in Silicon Valley, let's say, then you see the adoption is much faster. They're closer to the source of this whole development, the change. So for them, you see these trends of people saying, oh, I have a solo founder or 3-team founder, no funding, we can build a lot of things, because suddenly they unblock this barrier of needing capital to hire an army of developers to do something which you can quickly do yourself. So I think in the space of coding and associated tasks like product management, design, and so on, all of these are being compressed a bit. It doesn't mean that demand is disappearing, so I can get back to that in a minute, but so these domains are the fastest affected. In other areas, we can see there is an impact, but it's slower, but you see it slowly building up. And then I think the key thing is that the gap here is a knowledge gap between the companies that know how this technology works, what can it do, and the companies who are still evaluating, doing a pilot, thinking about it, right? So I think that's where you don't see the full impact, because some companies are adopting, some are not adopting. But I think one word of caution here, if we take it and say, look, I can see I'm running ChatGPT, it can do for me SEO, it can design the website, it can do everything for me, I don't need like these 5 people. The challenge is that sometimes the full scope of the role, right? So a good metaphor for this is like, okay, I have technology, I have a doorman in a hotel. Okay, you go to the Ritz-Carlton, there's a doorman, he helps you open the door. So you say, look, I can put here a sensor, just open the door automatically when somebody comes, then I don't need this guy. When you do the replacement, you'll realize he helps, is a high-end establishment, he's helping people with directions, he's protecting against thieves, whatever it is, and this technology cannot do it. So I think in the same way, if you replace 10 people with like a bot, sometimes you'll find that there's a challenge On the other hand, the other thing that's happening, that technology gets better, right? So because of that, you have a lot of conflicting stories and ideas. People say, okay, one company fired 50% of their customer service, then next year or next month, suddenly they need to rehire more because they realize it doesn't work. So I think there's a bit of uncertainty, but in reality, what you can say for sure is that for many roles, one person can do the work of 5, sometimes more, in the old way of work, right? So once you adopt a new workflow, you can accelerate. If you want to use the old workflow you're using anyway, then you're going to still be slow because everything will be the same, just maybe the steps will be faster, but then not the overall outcome.
So lots to unpack there. Obviously, the headlines are like Meta is considering to do 20% layoffs. Right. And Mark Zuckerberg said, hey, historically, there used to be a team of engineers, and now one person can do all of it as long as that person is highly motivated and highly skilled at using AI. And I think there was another example where I think Cloud had a marketing team that does paid marketing. And historically, a team like that would probably be about 10 to 15 people doing ad copy, advertising, so forth. And it was just one guy, right? Yeah. So everyone's like, hey, this one guy is doing all of this advertising using Cloud, right? So I think there's this headlines. How are you thinking about this?
So I think for big tech, it's a more special dynamic. During the pandemic, they overhired, right? So even you see Block, let's remove 4,000 people. They say it's AI, but is it really AI or is this overhiring? Nobody really knows. So I think one thing is obviously Wall Street is rewarding listed companies, at least, for claiming that they are using AI because it sounds like it's going to be higher productivity. At the same time, there's something real here, right? Because if you're Meta, and I believe that Mark Zuckerberg's key thinking is like we're a coding company, right? But then if you have a team of 100, maybe you can replace it with 10 people who are super motivated and motivated to use AI. In the past, the one guy who is super motivated, super smart, he can do maybe 10x than his colleagues, but you will not be able to scale it, right? You'll only have like a handful of these people, I assume. And they'll be usually attracted to open their own startup or whatever it is. So today, I think the challenge for big tech, beyond maybe having bloat from hiring too much before, is that they have teams, and even though they're closer to the source of the technology or they adopted it faster than others, like Meta has their own LLMs and so on, they still would have people who are less comfortable using AI. And the reason for coders is quite straightforward, is an identity crisis, right? Like if you say, look, I'm the best coder in the world, suddenly, oh, just let the code run. So different people react differently, but what I observe is that a lot of people, they have a fear of letting go, meaning I want to control it. And I think just for a minute, if we look at other jobs, what this means that you spend a lot of time checking, okay? And checking is not that it's bad, but if you check every line, then you create this dynamic, which I think about as verification tax, right? Like I'm writing 100 pages of AI, then I'm spending 5 hours to read what it wrote. I can generate more, but spend even more time checking. So for software, at least, we can use the AI also to help us test it, to check it for quality and so on. So if you have that mindset of try to use AI for most of the work, you don't need to spend a lot of time verifying it. But when you come from the perspective, oh, I used ChatGPT 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and then it gave me a stupid answer, so therefore it's not good. I need to be very careful, okay? In my own company, I had like one time, we had some urgent fix, and I was like looking at it personally. And it was just one line of code. So I asked the person who was like in charge, supposedly fixing it, I said, why not you just use AI to fix it? They say, no, come on, it's just one line. Why should I use AI for one line? So it's not that it's right or wrong from a value system point of view, but if it takes you 1 minute to do it by hand, then it will take you a second to do it with AI, whatever, 5 seconds, and maybe a bit more. So it'll take you 3 minutes without the AI and half a minute with. My point is that there's a barrier for the usage. You don't want to use it because, oh, for one line it's not worth it, complicated problem, I want to trust my own instinct. So because of that, there's a bit of problem. Now, looking from the management point of view, they can see that the guy who really adopted it, he would be much more productive. As a side note, we need to say also what is productive, because you can generate 30 million lines of code in a month, but who's going to, again, there's a question of testing. Is it really relevant? Okay.
And what does that look like in the context of your companies? Because you are an employer, you are looking at code, you are an engineer.
That's a good question. So the way it shows up is actually a continuum, okay? So the first time I realized that this can be super useful, right? Maybe it was just like, oh, let's put a question in a chat, what kind of tool to use, how to architect something, and then, oh, we can get the answer. Now, later on, I said, look, this is fantastic, okay? We can have like these coding agents. So what I thought, a bit naively, I said, okay, let's double the headcount, give everybody AI, we're gonna be like each one 5 times more productive, the whole thing will be 10 times more productive, we're ready to conquer the world. And what I discovered is that when we hire based on a filter of what is the signal for the hiring based on the older workflow, okay, sit down and write for me a full stack app or whatever it was, it doesn't really capture the fluency of using the AI, right? If instead you say, okay, I want you to use AI to build something, then you will see whether the person can really do this. So I think what I learned is that it's very difficult to make a change, okay? Like change management in general, that always is difficult because what is the alignment of incentives? What do people want to do? So in my case, I think ultimately try to avoid like firing people and replacing with AI because it seems unfair. But at the same time, a lot of time people leave and then you can say, okay, this person left. Do we really need somebody else in this particular role when we have the AI? And coming back to the big tech, by the way, when you have a team of 100 and many are resistant, so ultimately many of them resort to this kind of, okay, let's cut the people. So now in my case, another kind of example to share would be that when we started adopting it, suddenly you see these kinds of either anomalies or even like time arbitrage. What do I mean by that? So let's say I had like a couple of junior product managers and they said, look, I want to have a ChatGPT subscription to help my work. Today, like I think a lot of companies would have like everybody has it and so on. So that was a bit new, but I figured if you're spending like $20 on a person when his salary is much more, is no problem. Give it to them. Over a few weeks or months, suddenly we realized that whoever tells them I want ABC in the product, they would put it into the ChatGPT, get the spec, and then share it with the developer. But what that meant is that either the developer or the supervisor could do the same thing and write into the chat and send to the other guy. So they became, in the world of technology, what people call like an LLM wrapper. Like
The product manager is the LLM
Yeah,
wrapper.
yeah.
Sorry, that's so funny.
Yeah. To me, the implication is that we need to think about jobs in a different way. We need to think, what is the job? What is the outcome we want? How do we achieve the outcome using AI to the maximum? And then redesign the job towards that instead of saying, okay, in this company, I have 2 product managers, 3 designers, 5 this, 5 that. And then ultimately, you're not efficient. And when you're not efficient, the market is going to punish you through P&L or whichever way. Yeah. So I think moving forward, the way I look at it now is what we want to do is to leverage AI to the maximum possible. And as new models are rolling out, new capability rolling out, but also we understand better how to do it. Because one of the interesting things about this whole phenomenon is actually nobody has a playbook, right? Nobody can tell you, okay, listen, the best way to use something in your industry is ABC. You'll have a lot of people. If you go to social media, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, or LinkedIn, 1 million people tell you, listen, Cloud Code, you can use it for SEO. Click here, pay me $5, I'm going to give you something, right? So there are a lot of playbook, but there's no gold standard. So nobody really knows. So a lot of it is experimentation. So as we get better anyway, what we can do is design the roles better, possibly need less people to do the same things. And what is even more interesting, that some roles which are super specialized, okay, and in the past may have commanded more of a premium. Think about things like DevOps. So DevOps, let's say 5 years ago, you want to find a DevOps guy in Singapore, maybe you can start at $10,000, maybe more. And I'm not saying it's not needed anymore, but to a certain extent, these things like deployments, containerization, using whatever CLI of your cloud, whether it's GCP, AWS, or Azure, all of this can be done by the AI autonomously. Okay, it's a bit scary because you don't know, maybe it's going to delete your whole cloud. Okay, still you can achieve results. So anything that has to do with knowledge, suddenly the knowledge is not as critical as the mindset. Okay, so coming back to what you mentioned about Mark Zuckerberg. So if you have the right mindset, you're motivated, you can achieve much, much more. One of the reasons is that these AI coding agents, at least, they take some time to work, right? So you ask it something and take 5 minutes. So at the same time, you can spawn or answer or unblock another process. And so you can actually work on 10 projects at the same time, or 5, depending on whatever your appetite is, which means the productivity really jumps. And the key point in my mind is about the importance of this motivation. One of my favorite thoughts about it is a quote from Tony Robbins, which is to say, is everything in business is 80% psychology, 20% skill. Okay, because if you have the right psychology, instead of being scared of the problem, you go and solve it, or you'll find somebody to help you, or whatever it is. That's his thought. But when I look at it today with the AI, it suddenly becomes 99% psychology, 1% skill, because the skill is just, are you able to tell yourself, look, I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to ask the AI. So you need more humility. Now, how it relates to the employer's perspective is that the challenge is the person who's not motivated with AI, he may not be able to produce as much. He will not want to do 10 things at the same time. But also, even though the technology is improving, if you have higher motivation, you think deeper, you'll have a better prompt, you'll have a better framework to work. So suddenly you'll have this acceleration, right? So I think ultimately what this creates is a dynamic where some people adopting it, they become much, much faster. They become more valuable to employers. And at the same time, other people may be more resistant or they don't think it's important. Or as I said, they tried ChatGPT 3 years ago and the answer didn't look good. And so they said, let's wait for it to mature. And then what this dynamic creates something which you can think of as Hollywoodization of the workplace. Okay, what does that mean? In Hollywood, they have stars like George Clooney. You can give him $6 million for I don't know, half an hour appearance or I don't know, whatever it is. At the same time, it used to be that you can be an extra, right? Like if you are like an attractive looking person interested to go into show business, you'll go to Los Angeles and try to get the job as like
a background person walking around, drinking coffee.
Exactly. And like an extra, what they call an extra. So now they save money, but saying, look, the extras are just going to be AI generated because anyway, they're behind, they're not even in the focus.
Yeah, they won't sneeze, they won't complain, they won't need to use a toilet, you can use a digital.
Exactly. You can get them to look any way you want, like you're saying. So it's very, very easy. So what happens is this kind of distribution where the star gets a huge amount of money, a huge prize, a huge compensation. The extras were getting very little. Now they're not even there anymore. So if you look at the office, it's not that it was this discrepancy in the office, but if you have roles which are becoming like extras, or there were extras at the beginning, right? Like people who, I have a lot of emails, we need to answer the emails. Can you, like, you're in charge of answering the emails, right? So today, it's not that you want AI to answer everything, but you can say, okay, the AI will craft the response, you just say, okay. Or as you get confident, you say only the 20 tickets you need a person. So it means that some jobs are being deleted, whereas at the same time, the stars that are able to use AI charge the productivity, rewarded more. I saw the other day, I can't remember exactly, but I think there was a statistic I saw in Business Times in Singapore that they said that like there's a jump in the number of listings of jobs, and then 23% of them require AI. Okay, so what I read into it, of course, anybody can read what they want, but what I read into it is that there's a demand, like people realize, okay, everybody tells me I can be fantastic, but in my company, I don't see it. Okay, so let's hire somebody who will know how to do it. The reason I think this is this Hollywoodization dynamic is because at the same time people report, and also anecdotally, that fresh graduates find it very difficult to find a job. The number of fresh graduates who apply for jobs and get like zero hiring is doubling compared to a year or 2 years ago. It means to me is that the jobs which were the main thing for the fresh graduates, which is like grunt work, prepare for me Excel, prepare for me PowerPoint. So that's a classic example, right? Because if you need a PowerPoint, maybe as a leader 10 years ago, you would say, okay, somebody will design it for me, make it nice. And now you can go to Gamma or Canva and immediately get it. To be fair, I think if you want very high quality and to look really, really good, you probably need a person to go through it, like a design. For things which are just like quick and dirty, like, okay, I'm coming to a meeting with you. It's not like a high stakes thing. I can do a quick PowerPoint and it's done totally by the AI. So what that means is the level, grunt work kind of things, totally gone or 90% gone. Okay, and it's just like these stories that DBS said that, oh, we're going to cancel 3,000 contract jobs or entry level, that these things are taken by AI, but people see that certain activities that you require the person, and then often in our context, if you need one person, maybe he's going to be sick, he's going to be away, so maybe I'll have two people for this thing, right? And then suddenly you can say, look, I don't need anyone because somebody in another role can just oversee it.
Yeah. I think the Hollywood dynamic is a good example of the barbell, right? Which is that there are two distinct strategies. The blockbuster strategy, where it's like Avengers and Disney and Star Wars. And then there's your long tail, which is your YouTube, right? Where there's a lot of content that's effectively free or very low cost, but generated with a very long tail dynamic. So two very distinct strategies. And I think I see that in the marketplace as well. I think people are looking for the superstars who are comfortable using AI, self-started, motivated, get stuff done. I think their salaries are doubling in the market today, especially if they're able to use AI, because a productive person using AI is probably at least twice or 3 times more productive than what they were in the past. I have so many stories of I don't know if you heard it as well, as like CTOs who haven't done coding for a while. And then now they're just cutting off all the middle management layers because they're just doing it themselves.
Yeah, so I back to coding myself also, okay? I mean, not cutting anyone, but just doing more myself. I think about the salary point you mentioned, I think in reality it's rare to see people doubling the salary for many, many reasons. So I think that is one of the things that I believe will have to change. And the reason is, and again, I think it would happen in very small setups. Like if you have like 3 people and then one of them is doing the job of 10, you can say, this is a startup, I saved whatever. In the context of bigger organization, imagine like the civil service or a big company, but even Meta, right? In Meta, it seems like big enough that it'll be difficult to suddenly increase the salaries. So the reason why this, I feel, is the way of the future is because when you have these huge productivity gains, if it all goes to the company, it makes people feel that is not fair. Now, what that means is that potentially, again, depending on the company and what visibility they have into what you're doing, it means that it's possible that today you have somebody working in a company, he has some what we call shadow AI. He has his personal ChatGPT account to help him. Then he can accelerate the work 5 times more, but he has no incentive to tell anyone because this is one of these things that you dig a bigger ditch, they'll give you a bigger shovel. They're not going to give you, like basically they give you more work and not give you more money. So I believe that what we need is a better alignment of incentives, right? So as people get better at this, they produce more, then, and this is what I try to do myself, is like really reward people who adopt this, and through that, share the productivity gain. Now, to be fair, it's not that like in my own company, if I were selling X last year, now I'm selling 20X because of this, right? Like this against like your actual top line and bottom line. But from a larger perspective, if you're really able to achieve the same outcome and the same numbers with less people, it would make sense to kind of distribute it in a different way. It's like a mindset shift, right? To people, both the employees and the employers, like a social contract. You're selling me hours, I'm paying you salary, then I own you for this 9 to 5 period. It doesn't matter what you're doing. To the employee, it perhaps is more like, oh, for the past 5 years, I'm doing exactly this kind of scope every day. So how can you expect me to do 5 times more and pay me the same? So there's a bit of a tension here. By the way, paying everybody double is also for established businesses, unlike startups perhaps, is that the competitive dynamic may also compress their income, because we hear about it all the time that, oh, I wrote a Monday.com Slack myself in 1 day. So it's not really the same, but there is possibility that in the margins, people, organizations that code their own tools will stop some subscriptions because they can customize the tool. Like basically they write their own workflow, CRM or so on. The challenge, of course, in a serious organization, maybe they will think, who's going to maintain it? Like if one guy wrote it, tomorrow he left. But still, I think there's a downward compression on prices of certain things. So that means as productivity goes up, there is a challenge maybe for some employers to share more. But in general, I think this is something that would shape the future because these superstars will want to have more. And if we frame it correctly, that everybody can see that this is a dynamic, I think more people will want to be superstars as opposed to let's keep to the way of the past, because the past is probably gone, right? It's not ever going to come back.
I'm referring to 2 dynamics. The first is I'm looking at this primarily, for example, at the area that's been most impacted, which is Silicon Valley and engineers who are able to use the AI coal mine dynamic, which is that barbelling is very obvious. The productivity gains are super obvious. And I'm using them as an example, I think, for other professions, whether that's marketing, for lawyers, etc. I think there's going to be that barbelling piece. I think the second piece I would say is, where I also agree with you, is I don't think it's going to happen at the companies that add. They're going to get that doubling at the next company. Because if they're able to do well, etc., the employers will have to change their mind. And like you said, employers will find it difficult to pay double for an existing leader who's doubled the productivity. But I do think that competitor companies who see that this person is much more productive will be happy to pay that double to fight against each other. And I think that's going to be what drives the barbelling, is the competitive swapping of the top talent. And then as they swap the top talent outwards, the lower competitive firms get shedded out. And then they also shed their lower productive middle workers. And like you said, at the lower end of the workforce, whether that's supply chain is very difficult to digitize right now, or physical reality jobs. And also, I think if you look at other jobs, there's so many things, like even in Hollywood, like YouTube or TikTok, everybody's creating that content for free, right? That's the cheapest of cheapest, right? Or unpaid interns, I guess. Yeah. So I think there's going to be an interesting dynamic. I think people just have to create their own new jobs.
Right. So Okay, it's difficult to say. So one thing which is coming back again to the mindset, right? If you have the right mindset and you say, look, I want to be successful, it means that suddenly you have all these tools that previously didn't have, right? So when I was a kid, if I wanted to get a job, okay, a part-time job to do something, so I could write code for people, get a bit of money. Today, somebody who could write a bit of code to get money could like build some website and sell some service. Then it doesn't even know how to do it. It just asks some AI, build for me the website, tell me how to connect Stripe, tell me how to do Google Ads, right? So they're willing to ask the question and just trust that something good will come out of it, okay? Of course, you cannot give blind trust, okay, because it may give you the wrong thing, and there's many examples of that. So it means the opportunity of building your own business is more. That, by the way, reminds me of, okay, I don't know if it's a good thing to mention, okay, but I find it just relates directly to your question. So I told you that, like, I gave a couple of people ChatGPT subscriptions years ago, and one time I saw one of them asking the ChatGPT, like, what's a good side hustle to do right now? Using the company ChatGPT to find, not saying, like, not to pass judgment, is it good or bad, but it shows you that maybe then, I don't know what quality of idea I would give you, but today there are possibly, it will be able to give you advice. I still think it will be too generic, like it won't be able to really give you a blockbuster, but you can see certain things that people build. Like, I don't know if you saw this thing called, I think it's Polsia. Polsia is like the opposite of AI slop, okay? So somebody took this word, reverse it. It created a website where you can create your own business. Maybe you pay for your domain or something, and he builds the whole app for this thing that you make up something that you're selling. And then it will go and put Google ads and try to promote it. And he acts like a CEO every day, and at the end of the day looks at what happened and try to pivot and try to improve it. So whether it works or not, I don't know, but that guy is making a lot of money because he charges $49 for this thing. And then people are trying it out. Maybe they can earn like $50 from building this thing. So they earn 100 and they pay 50 to him, I don't know. But what it shows you is the ability to build your own business, which was already very elevated compared to 20 or 100 years ago, right? That you become a creator on YouTube, you start a podcast, like you have a million ways to create the funnel and then monetize. So with this thing, on one hand, there is much easier. The other side of the coin is now it's easier for everyone, right? So if somebody is sitting in Indonesia or in Pakistan or anywhere, they can also do the same thing. And more than before, you could say, look, a guy sitting in Pakistan is going to do a podcast. The accent is not going to come out right, but now he can just replace himself with somebody who looks different, has a Texan accent. So anybody can do anything they want. And we see that, by the way, that there's these AI creators on TikTok or Instagram, either disclose the AI, sometimes it's like not even disclose their AI. So I think at the end, what is exciting here is that somebody who has the motivation, is willing to try and fail a few times, can actually reach to things that were totally impossible before. At the same time, like with your barbell, the challenge is for whoever is like used to, okay, I'm just doing this thing, I'm sheltered, I have this job, it's a very safe job, I'm gonna work here another 10 years and I don't need to do more. I don't need to do things out of my scope. I don't need to learn new things. I'm just like coasting through life, okay? Which I guess there are a lot of people like that, right? So it's a question of, do you value? So I think those people are gonna potentially be very challenged unless they're in an industry where there's high demand. Let's say you're a nurse or a speech therapist for old folks who have a stroke. Then because Singapore is aging, obviously there's infinite amount of work and it's not gonna change with anything. On the other hand, if you're the guy creating PowerPoints, expert in Excel, like it used to be like, I don't know, 10 years ago, I had this person doing accounting and we even sent her to more courses. She was like an Excel expert. She can write all these macros and create for you like a whole system that nobody else can create, right? Today, somebody who doesn't know anything can ask, okay, can you create for me an Excel macro? Things like Claude can actually give you the whole Excel without even knowing anything. So I think these roles are more at risk. And then the challenge for employers is really how to rebuild it to use the same knowledge and organization knowledge that people have, but somehow redesign the workflows so they will use more AI and it will be more effective.
I mean, it's more likely it could be a new company rather than an
Of
existing
course.
company, right? Because a startup is able to shed all of their legacy positions, right? I mean, I think right now Y Combinator is asking for AI native law firms because law firms historically charge by billable hours.
Exactly.
And so the more human hours you do, the more I can charge you and the more revenue you have. And that model breaks the moment you have AI because AI technically for generating, let's just say, document templates would be instantaneously but that doesn't translate to billable hours, which doesn't translate to revenue. So why are you doing it? Therefore, why Combinator's argument is if you invert it and can pay on performance, then you could have a law firm that outcompetes existing law firms. Lots of debate whether it's doable or not, but I think that's the current tender they have here.
This is really an example of some instability, and it will change, but I don't think this will be the end result, right? So right now, the phenomenon you see is that maybe many of the people in the marketplace or the participants in the marketplace do not really factor in what AI can do, right? So I'm saying, look, I'm going to a lawyer and I don't want to use AI because I read in the paper that some judge threw out a case in New York that ChatGPT made up references to previous cases. So on the other hand, if you ground it, right, like you tell it, okay, only give me real things, give me a link to it, check that, or you give them a database to access. So what it means that if you kind of hide the AI and say, okay, we're a great law firm and you have like fantastic people in front, use the AI, then you can, obviously, I guess you're cheating about the billable hours, but you can then get huge reward because people pay more. Some examples I think we saw before, I mean, in the news is like, let's say for consulting, there's, I think it was Deloitte or one of these big four in some country, they actually had to return some money because somebody discovered that whatever they gave them was just a product of AI. But similarly, I think in your podcast, somebody mentioned before about the BetterHelp. So because of the structure of incentives, even though it's supposed to be, I'm talking to a human therapist, but the therapist was rewarded by how much throughput they have. So these therapists resorted to using AI, right? So on one hand, they could get more money. At the end, there's like a backlash if people discover, because if you tell me that I'm using AI for getting the help, I can just use my own AI. Then even though maybe he knows me too well, so I'm not sure ideal. So okay, let's do AI native law firms or other professional services. As the market rebalances, all the firms will be like this, right? Because you can't really stop that. And even if you're like the smallest law firm just doing, I'm doing wills, I'm a notary. So notary maybe not because there's not a lot of judgment there. But if you're doing templates, right? So then somebody who wants to increase their practice, they say, look, I have these templates for free. Only when you need something serious, come back to me, right? Competition for the people who just do templated stuff will be quite harsh. Yeah, market will evolve in a way that things are going to be different. And certain types of companies, like you said, there's going to be this creative destruction where the people who are better because of adopting AI. So actually there's a good quote from Peter Diamandis, right? I heard him say that like at least 3-4 years ago, that he said by 2030, there are going to be two types of companies, those who use AI fully and those who are out of business. Because this dynamic, like what you mentioned about lawyers, will mean that the top dollar will go to these people who can create the outcomes and they can create better outcomes. And if they're competing with people who are not using AI, even with an army, like all these TV shows, The Good Wife or something, we have like, we're doing the depositions, we're doing the ability to go through 200 boxes of discovery, the people with the AI can do it much faster. Still, this example, by the way, shows why you still need people, because the ability to have judgment, to have creativity, to think about some idea that is not in the data, is not in previous training, I couldn't find it on Reddit. It's like totally my new idea. This will still require a human, and then those people are able to like be the glue between AI that runs fast, but also direct it to a really useful outcome. These are the people who are going to be rewarded the most.
Yeah, I think I was talking to a lawyer and his vision of the future was, as obviously more people use AI, they're going to be able to do more class action lawsuits, for example, because more damages can be found, more incidents can be done. So there's going to be more lawsuits with larger number of people who are claiming damages. So the number of cases is going to go up, but the number of human judges will stay the same because they're funded by the government. So you're going to see a lengthening of the wait time before you can go to court because of more cases. And then you're going to see more lawyers duking it out against each other and negotiating, for example, which is very human, trying to figure out mediation or settlements themselves. Because if not, the court case is going to take them years or decades to even go through, right? So there's going to be an interesting dynamic where value shifts to different parts of that value chain. But I think this is a good segue to in our piece, which is we talked about was policy, right? Which is what should policymakers be doing or thinking about this? And I think Singapore budget was saying one of the key pillars was about AI. I was at the Singapore press holdings, the Lian He Zhaobao, kind of like Chinese language ministers roundtable talking about AI and how they see upskilling workers is important for that. And we thought that it would be fun to talk about what Singapore needs to do in terms of its niche or approach to AI, but also kind of compare and contrast that to the US and Israel as jurisdictions.
Right. First of all, the budget 2026 here obviously is leaning in a lot into the AI. What is good about this, I think, is acknowledging that there is something to be done and then the government steps in. Specifically for small businesses or startups, what is good is they announce this is under something called EIS, right? The 4-time deduction for using AI. So let's say $50,000 plus you have another tax rebate. So ultimately, if you adopt AI to the tune of $50,000, probably you have almost no tax to pay if it's a small company. And this gives an incentive for people to push them into it. Another thing is, of course, this thing about reskilling, not out yet, but there's something about giving 6 months of ChatGPT or other equivalent subscriptions.
But only the people who are taking AI upskilling courses.
Yeah, they take the course, so it's like
yeah.
an incentive to take you into the course. And I think as part of that, the same thing is that the claim is we want to train 100,000 people to be bilingual in the sense that they can use AI. Okay, so I think clever framing, because maybe people are a bit like there's this upskilling fatigue, right? You keep on talking about upskilling. So now it's not upskilling, I'm going to make you fluent. And then it sounds maybe more appealing, especially in a country that most people have like mother tongue language and so on. So I think this is fantastic compared to other countries, because you look at the US, even though it's the cradle of all these LLMs and all this technology, the technology is coming out of there. The data centers, GPUs, whatever it is, are coming from there. But there's not a lot of thought about how do we make the workforce more effective using it. I think this is part of this thinking about free market. Like the market is going to solve it. We don't need to babysit the market. If you look at Israel, Israel is a small country, a bit like Singapore in a sense. And over there is known for being like a startup nation, right? So you have all these startups, and the startups to a large extent are adopting it, even though pace might be uneven, right? So some people adopt it in this way, other way. What you see clearly that the adoption is very high. It's causing the same effects on employment we talked about. They call it over there the junior crisis. Like people who are junior, is very difficult to find jobs. You can also see other cases. Maybe somebody left the workforce for 8 months for whatever reason. Now he cannot even find a job because he doesn't know the market moved to the fact that you have to have this skill. He was like maybe a very good programmer before. So, but in Israel, again, also because of, I guess, like the war and the previous war and so on, there's not a lot of focus on this kind of upskilling. So I think Singapore in that sense shines as a place which is different. On the other hand, when you look at it realistically, the challenge is that these policies, they are creating an incentive. The question is, are we able to fulfill this potential, right? So if we think about, and again, not as criticism, just I think this is a fact, right? Think about the low fertility rate, right? We have baby bonus, and my son, I'm Singaporean, even though I don't look like, and I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, okay? So we got a certain amount of money. I think now you get over years, doubled it, quadrupled it, but it didn't help, right? Because the incentive is there, but people have their own mindset. Same with AI, you give the incentive, but whether it's gonna work or not is less clear. By the way, in the space of productivity, I think there was a previous example of this. If you remember, there's something called productivity and innovation credit, where a lot of emphasis was put on creating digitalization, and with the over eagerness to drive adoption, there was some loophole there that you could spend a certain amount of money buying iPads and get more money than the cost of the iPads. It created the wrong incentive. But my point is that after doing all that, the productivity level in the whole marketplace did not really jump. So I think the challenge for policymakers is like, you can bring the horse to the water, you cannot force it to drink, right? So in that sense, I think it's still a bit of a challenge. I would say is a good set of schemes, something that shows awareness of the problem, acutely being aware of it and desire to solve it. I feel that I'm a bit ambivalent about whether it really will change the playing field, at least like within a year. It's not necessarily so easy.
So what's the solution, right? Because where I agree with you is that I think Singapore is first to act, I think from a government perspective, to say this is really important. And not only that, but putting money behind it, right? Which is, every government can talk about it, right? So I think you have to respect the policymakers in Singapore for doing that. But of course, the question that we're figuring out is, what is the most effective way to do it? And so if you don't mind, what would be approaches to make it happen, right? So I have a crazy idea. Why doesn't Singapore, the policy, say, we're going to give every citizen and PR employment pass holder, we want them to be productive, we're going to give them AI subscription. So that's about, let's say, 6 million people effectively. And we're going to negotiate with either Anthropic or ChatGPT, OpenAI or Google, or maybe it be open source, build a data center in Singapore, have data sovereignty, and you have 6 million, you can negotiate pretty well. If you actually think about it, like, because if you're doing open source and also you're looking at the current costs, and then you build a data center in Singapore, you're stimulating your own economy with the electricity, electricians, wiring, hardware. I mean, example, right? And then everybody's access to it, the poor, the rich, the middle class, the job seeker. And so that could be one way to make it kind of like equivalent to a cash voucher that you give to a hawker center to stimulate the F&B industry. You're basically giving everybody, stimulating your own data center industry. So that could be one way in my head. And just let every kid use it.
Right.
So that'll be one idea. How about you? What you have in?
So first of all, this idea I think is a good idea. Okay. So anyway, but my first response to this, being long time in Singapore, the textbook answer to this beyond my pay grade because I'm not in that play. I think the idea of the subscription is a strong idea, and I believe in the UAE at least they toyed with this idea. Okay, because they're also building data centers and so on, and obviously anybody who's doing a national level can negotiate both because of the branding, like to say this nation chose me, and the other part. What I would look at in addition to this, because I cannot steal your idea, is about three different things. One is, I think, in the education system, right? So education system worldwide is still wired to the old way of working, right? Just like I said, when I hire people, am I using the signals of AI or the old signals? So in the education, to a large extent, we're still relying on the old way of assessing people, the course curriculum, how do you do the learning outcome. So now if you took me even to an Ivy League or university that probably will have advanced and integrated AI, you would still value a lot the accumulation of knowledge. These are historical organizations doing it for years and hundreds of years. So the shift towards using the AI is to empower not only the learning, but that the learning is about how to use AI. Meaning when the person goes into the workforce, whatever he learned in that particular course is probably available to the LLM. And if it's not available, it's like a search away, right? So the LLM can also search. So how do you create people who have some knowledge, but they're able to adapt themselves to use the AI as augmenting their capability to really 10x it. So to make a long story short, I think today is not optimized for that, right? So today is optimized more, and you see it a lot. The students cheat and do their homework with the AI, and the organization says you're not allowed to use AI. So like you apply to university, it says don't use AI to fill your essay. So it's like the whole thinking, it is shaming the use of AI, and people still do it behind, just like they would use all these other websites where you can share essays or whatever, so people are using it extensively. So I think this is one big change, to transform the education and basically doing more on the job training, right? So if the actual studying is compressed a bit and you need to learn on the job, because to understand how to use the AI, you have to iterate, you have to try it. I think that's one idea, like transforming the education, maybe more of an apprenticeship model like in the Middle Ages, and less of this mass 3-year gateway of acquiring knowledge. Another thing which I touched upon before, and I don't really have like a formula, but I think Singapore could be a leader in this because of this tripartite model. So you can say, look, the government steps in and says, how can we share the productivity gain with employees? I think the question is whether it's possible to maybe distribute a certain amount to everybody, but to create frameworks that the people who really contribute, they are rewarded, even though the open market will probably do that anyway, like you said, and then they'll move to another company, but maybe there's some way to incorporate that. So that would be one, education, one is this sharing. So, I mean, when I said three, one is that the employers would actually do this themselves, and then maybe the government can come with frameworks, right? Because today there's so many frameworks about how to have a fairness in hiring, fairness in this, but if the job market is compressing, how do you actually create more jobs and employers to share whatever gains they have?
That's good. On that note, I'd love to summarize the 3 big takeaways. First of all, thanks so much for sharing about kind of like what job productivity looks like from an employer perspective. And I think we use some examples of not just theoretically how jobs will change, but also how employers are actually already reshaping how they are employing and choosing to reward performance. Secondly, thanks so much for sharing about the dimension about how it could play out in different industries. I think we gave 2 examples. One, of course, was the Hollywood industry, where A-list actors are getting rewarded even more, but extras are being replaced by digital extras. And so there's an interesting barbell effect that's happening And we see that same barbell effect happening to engineering right now, especially in Silicon Valley, and how we think that's going to increasingly show up in engineering in Southeast Asia, but also in other professions globally as well. And about policy, about how there could be different approaches to hopefully make things happen, whether that's from helping everybody have access to AI, to better education, to on-the-job training. On that note, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.